Hi guys, it's Lynette. Let's make some baklava. I'm going to walk you through step by step how to make this delicious dessert. First things first, we have 4 cups of chopped walnuts in our bowl. They need to be chopped down a little bit finer, so I'm going to just use my knife to chop these walnuts. Now you can also add them to a food processor and just pulse a few times until they're chopped a little bit finer. In case you don't have a food processor, I just wanted to show you how you can do this by hand. So once you chop your walnuts down, we're going to add them to a mixing bowl, and I'll show you a little bit closer how they look. There you go. And to that, we're going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon and an 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves. Sometimes I add about 2 teaspoons cinnamon, but that's totally up to you. So we're going to mix all of that together until it's well combined. And then we're just going to set our walnut mixture to the side until we are ready to add it to our baklava. All right, so next thing we're going to do is melt 3 sticks of unsalted butter. And here we go right here. And then I'm just going to butter my baking dish. Now, my baking dish is about 11 by 15. Ideally, you would have a 9 by 13 inch pan. But I'm just going to make the phyllo dough fit, and I'll show you what I mean. So you're just going to butter the dish, and I'm using a pastry brush here to make sure I get the corners, the bottom, the sides as best as I can. That looks good. And then we're going to take our phyllo dough. Now, I thawed my phyllo dough overnight in the refrigerator and then allowed it to sit out at room temperature for about an hour. And the package has 2 packs in it. I'm only going to open 1 pack at a time. One thing about phyllo dough, it dries out really, really fast. So once you unroll it, you really want to cover it with a damp towel or a damp paper towel just to keep the layers as moist as possible, because they would get papery and start to rip as you're working with them. So I just try to work really, really fast, but you would really benefit from covering them with a damp cloth. All right, so we're going to start to add our phyllo dough to the bottom of our baking dish, and we're going to start with 10 layers in the bottom of our baking dish. Now look how paper thin they are. They're super, super thin. So 10 layers sounds like a lot, but believe me, it's going to be perfect. So I'm just going to start to add my phyllo dough to the bottom of my pan. And as you can see, there's a little bit on the side that still needs a little bit of phyllo dough. So I'm going to double up on these layers. But like I said, if you had a 9 by 13 inch pan, they would fit just about perfectly. So let's add another piece. And we are going to butter in between each layer. All right, so here we go. I'm just using my pastry brush. All right, so that looks good. We're going to add our next layer on. And it seems like a tedious process, but believe me, it's really, really simple, and it's so worth it. It's so worth it, and it's so good. I can't wait till you all make it. All right, so we're adding on our next sheet of phyllo pastry. There we go. Let's add on another one after we brush a little butter on there. And the butter kind of helps the layers to stick together. It keeps it nice and flaky. It moistens the phyllo pastry, so it just adds a lot of flavor, serves a lot of purposes. All right, so I'm going to add a little piece on the side just to complete that layer. And I won't do all 10 layers, but I just want to show you how you get it started. Don't worry, I'm going to skip around a little bit. All right, so there goes that butter. And we're off to a great start. So let's add another layer on. There we go. Once you work with phyllo dough, you'll see what I mean about how quickly it dries out. So you got to work fast, and you do want to cover it, like I said, with something that's a little bit moist. All right, so let's add on that butter. I'm really taking my time because I want you all to be able to recreate this at home. All right, so 10 layers are on. All right, so we skipped a little bit. So we're going to add in 1/3 of our walnut mixture right on top of that layer of phyllo dough, phyllo pastry, whatever way you want to call it. All right, so after 1/3 of our nuts are on, and I just try to cover the layer as best as possible. Remember, you need to leave some in the bowl for another 2 applications. So I try not to be too heavy-handed, and that's about how much I have left after my first layer. So now we're going to add on 5 layers of our phyllo dough, and we are going to butter in between each layer the same way we did with the bottom 10 layers. So remember, this layer is going to be 5. So same process, adding on your pastry, and then we're just going to add some melted butter. And like I said, we're doing 5 this go round. And we're just adding on our butter. And once we get 5, we're going to add another third of our walnuts. So it's like a lasagna type of thing. It's a layering thing. All right, so we're going to put another layer on. Add your butter. And now we have 5. So now we're going to go and add on another third of that chopped walnut mixture. So the same thing, you just want to cover the surface as best as possible. And you want to make sure you leave a little bit of walnuts in the bowl because we want to do one more layer with the 5 phyllo pastry and the rest of the walnuts. You want to leave a little bit in the bowl. I tend to be kind of heavy-handed, so I have to stop myself sometime and just make sure I'm not putting too much. I got to save some. All right, so that's looking good already. And that's how much I have left. All right, so 5 more layers of our phyllo dough are going right on top of these walnuts. I'm going to go ahead and open up that second pack. Remember, I only opened up 1 pack. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we can get through this next layer. So we're speeding it up just a little bit. All right, all of the last layers on. We're going to go ahead and add on the rest of those walnuts. So hopefully we saved enough. Yep, we did. So now we're going to top these walnuts with 10 layers of our phyllo dough. So this is the last and final layering process. So once it's all on, we're going to go ahead and cut our phyllo dough. And then you need to cut this before you put it in the oven. If you don't, the phyllo dough will be way too crispy once it comes out of the oven, and if you try to cut it, it'll all just break apart. So you want to cut it before you bake it. I cut almost down to the bottom. I don't want to scratch my pan up too much, so I cut almost down to the bottom. The main thing is just getting through most of the layers. You can always kind of cut the bottom layer with a spatula or something like that, but you definitely want to get through most. I would say 85 to 90% of the layers when you're cutting before you bake. Now I have my oven preheating to 350 degrees while I'm doing this. And some people prefer to cut theirs into diamonds. I just cut it into squares because every time I try to cut it into diamonds, it does not come out right. So I make it easy on myself and cut it into these beautiful squares. So we're just going to continue to cut. And some of the pastry may start to lift a little bit while you're trying to cut. But don't worry about that because what I do is just take my pastry brush and any bit of leftover butter and just kind of pat down any pieces that lifted up. So it's perfectly okay. The butter's like glue. It'll make it stick back together. All right, so this is looking good to me. And like I said, I'm going to take that pastry brush and just pat down any pieces that need to be patted down and kind of stuck back together. And this is looking like it is ready for the oven. So we're going to pop that in that 350 degree oven for about 45 minutes till it's nice and golden brown. But while it's baking, we're going to make our syrup. So we have 1 cup of sugar. We're going to add in 1 cup of water. To that, we're going to add in 1/2 cup honey, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and 1 teaspoon of lemon juice. That honey takes forever to come out of the cup. So there's our vanilla. And up next is our lemon juice. All right, so we're going to put this on the stove and bring it to a boil. You do want to make sure you stir it up so the sugar doesn't just sit on the bottom and burn. So just stir it up, and then you're going to bring it to a boil. And then we're going to reduce it to a simmer and allow this mixture to simmer for about 20 minutes. And I usually do this during the last 30 minutes of baking. So, you can have time to simmer it, and then you're going to remove it from the stove and let it cool for just a few minutes. All right, so this is looking good. This is after about 20 minutes. I'm just about to pull it off of the stove. And I'll just let it sit on my counter just for a few minutes while my baklava is still baking. Ooh, it always smells so good. All right, so after about 45 minutes, our baklava is ready. It's nice and golden brown. And we're going to take that syrup that we just made and pour it right over top of our baklava. All right, so it seems like it's going to be soggy, but believe me, it's not. It's going to be so delicious. And the baklava just soaks up this honey syrup. Oh my God, it's so good. All right, so we're just gonna pour this right over top. And you want to get into those crevices along the edges. Try to cover everything as good as possible. And I usually just allow mine to sit overnight. And I cover it very, very loosely with just like a piece of parchment paper. I don't cover it with plastic wrap because it'll get a little bit soggy. So I just cover it in parchment paper, let it sit overnight, let it cool completely. And this is the next day. Let's remove that parchment paper. And you can see that syrup has soaked in nicely. It looks so good. And of course, we got to cut ourselves a piece. So I usually take my offset spatula and just go over the areas where I cut. And you can see like the bottom, sometimes I just have to, use a little bit of muscle just to make sure I cut all the way through. And that first piece is always the hardest piece to get out, just like any other thing, cake or pie that you cut. All right, so let's see. Is it going to come out this time? Let's see. Oh, Lord. Oh, my video. All right, so come on, let's see. Third time's a charm. There we go. Look at this beautiful piece of baklava. Oh, my goodness, guys. Let me tell you something. This baklava is so good. You're going to have to pry yourself away. Let's get a closer look. Look at all those beautiful layers. I hope you all give this recipe a try. It is super simple. I will talk to you all later. Bye, guys.